From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, I sit down with Adam Silver to talk about one of my favorite topics, podcasting. Grab a drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here, and today I'm here with my friend Adam Silver, and we're going to talk all about podcasting. How are you today, Adam?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No, always a pleasure. It's always great to get other podcasters on because they understand what we do just a little bit, you would think, right?
This is true, yeah.
So I normally, with people in the WordPress space, I always ask what their WordPress origin story is. But in this case, I'm going to ask you what your podcast origin story is and why you chose to get into podcasting.
Oh, it's a great question. And honestly, they're completely tied together. I used to listen to, I used to watch podcasts because technically a podcast can be video or audio, or technically I think also a PDF is based in the technical terminology of a podcast, oddly. Anyway, I would watch photography content or listen to photography content. And then I got into WordPress as a photographer, and I thought, I wonder if there's any podcasts about photography. And about WordPress, podcasts about WordPress. That makes more sense. And there were a handful that were already gone. And then there was a few that were still around. So I started listening to them. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And I thought, you know what? I want to do that too. And just because there are others out there doesn't mean I can't do my own, because we all have a different voice and a different take on things. So that's kind of how I started. I mean, that's a very short version of how I got going. It took me a solid couple years before I actually even did that. But yeah, that's how I started podcasting, was about WordPress.
That's really interesting. And I know a lot of people start podcasting in the WordPress space because not about WordPress. So it's, different strokes for different folks, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I knew I wanted to contribute to the community of WordPress, but I didn't want to write or blog, and I prefer speaking. I think I do a better job at it. So that's how I started, 8.5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same. And in 8.5 years, have you kind of stuck with the same theme, or have you changed around, or where does that kind of set with the podcast?
Yeah, I've been consistent. I have not missed a week. And I have been consistent with my format. I have 4 segments of the show. I have, upcoming events, in the news, what I call the meat and potatoes, and I have a tip and tool of the week. Every 8 weeks, I do a Q&A where people send in questions. And then also I'll do, a handful, maybe a handful of interviews, maybe, 10 to 12 interviews per year, if that, more when there was in-person conferences, because I would actually interview people at WordCamps. I would specifically interview brand new WordCampers. But overall, yeah, it's been pretty much the same. And I keep my show really short on purpose. And I get a lot of feedback that people like that typically my episodes, non-interview based, are under 12 minutes in that time frame. And I made that a conscious decision. Also, it's just really hard to go too deep in an audio format.
Yeah, so true. And I think you mentioned the secret sauce to all this podcasting is the word consistency. Whether you choose to do a weekly show, a bi-weekly show, a monthly show, I think the only way you get ears on it and eyes on it if it's video is to be that consistent force out there. Doing one here and one there really doesn't work.
Yeah, I get asked all the time about that. And my show comes out every Monday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern, technically speaking. And so 3 a.m. Pacific. I was Pacific based, but I just left the clock the same as far as my server when I moved to the East Coast. But yeah, and I've missed, I would say, because of a cron job or of a server issue, in the episodes that I put out, I've probably had maybe half a dozen that were late in some capacity. And I hear about it because people become accustomed to your show coming out at a certain day and time. They do certain things. They work out, they walk the dog, they clean the dishes, whatever it is in the morning. They do that thing on Monday. And if my show's not there, I hear about it.
Yeah, it's so true. So that talks a little bit about the consistency factor. Do you prefer the short episodes to interviews, or are you kind of indifferent, or what's your take on that?
Interviews for me are easier to prepare for because I can do a little bit of research on the person. It's a conversation, so the prep is just different. And I can kind of see what they're doing on social. I usually know the person as well. I've met them in person more often than not. I get hit up all the time to have people on my podcast, and I turn down majority of them because they're usually just trying to pitch their service or product to my audience, and that's not what I'm after. So I know. And then as far as the other episodes, the non-interview episodes, I have a pretty good flow. I've gotten much faster at it. Even though it's a short show, it still takes a total of, I don't know, maybe an hour, hour and a half. Including prep, recording, and post, I'd say 90 minutes per show on the high end now. It used to take me 3 or 4 hours. I used to spend way too much time on the artwork for each episode. And I realized it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it just needs to be done. So I'm pretty quick with that as well now. Yeah,
I take a different trend with artwork. I use the same logo for every podcast and I'm done with it, but there's still work involved. And people think you go to a podcast, you do a record, you're done. And I would argue there's still a lot of, especially if it's an interview and especially if it's 30 or 45 minutes, for me, that turnaround is about 3 hours. So, you know, there's still a little bit of work involved there.
Yeah, I don't over edit mine. I'll take out some things. I know how to stop, and if I need a cough or breathe or take a breath, I'll snap my fingers so I have a waveform to work off of. But I don't do a ton of editing. Again, I just want to get the content out consistently. So I
agree. And when we try and make stuff perfect, we never get it done because there's no such thing as perfection, right?
Right. Progress, not perfection. And what's the other? There's a quote about perfection is the enemy of done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so true. Show notes or no show notes? Where do you sit on that fence?
Yeah, so I do show notes. I do. I also outline my show, and I write the show out in a sense, word for word, but it's more conversational. And I like to believe that based on my higher educational training, you wouldn't know. I have a degree in theater, so I can write. Cool. And so I write as I'm speaking, and it's more of an outline for me. But I might write it exactly how it may sound, but you don't know I'm reading something because I write it so I know what I'm talking about, and I can break it down. But I don't have to go by it all the time. I can definitely riff, if you will. I can kind of paraphrase what I already wrote. So, but I definitely do show notes. And then I don't put that as show notes. I actually take show notes as just bullet points. Or if I mention a URL or a link or something, I don't put my script in there. That's for sure.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your website, it's WordPress based, so that's what we're saying. Do you use a page builder, or have you kind of gone all in with blocks, or what do you do?
No, I'm on zero in on any blocks at the moment. Slightly embarrassed, but at the same token, I'm just so much faster with. My agency. I do the podcast as a give back to the community. I have a web agency as my full-time gig at the moment over at Concierge WP. And we use Beaver Builder across the board, as our stack. So I know the guys who built it. I met them many, many years ago at where did I meet them? I guess I met them at Cabo Press, probably 2015, 2014, in that range. 2015, I think. So before that, I used a different theme and a different pre-page builder. Actually, it was called, do you remember Headway?
I was in the Headway community for many,
we did talk about that.
Years.
We did talk about that.
We did.
Yes,
of course. Yes.
So yes, I used to use Headway. Yeah, because I almost, anyway, so I use Beaver Builder. I just got interviewed for my own show, actually, ironically enough. A friend of mine interviewed me and asked the question, kind of teased me that I haven't used any Gutenberg, any block editor yet. I've considered it. I'm thinking maybe this year I will do a task, and maybe I'll challenge myself to rebuild Kitchen Sink WP with the block editor. And maybe I've heard good things about Cadence and Cadence blocks.
Mm-hmm. And
so
just for interest's sake, Cadence blocks at the time of this record just came out version 3.0 this week. So
right.
That's
So
now out.
I may go down that path and just kind of give it a shot. But again, like I've launched, in this past year, we're in the end of February as recording this. And I've launched 3 or 4 sites, just small little things on my own just to have fun. And just because I just know the tool of Beaver Builder so well, it's quick and easy for me. And that's half the battle sometimes is getting a site done is just knowing the tools.
Mm-hmm. It's always the battle in the agency world is deciding how do I learn something new versus how do I get it done for my client yesterday. It's that ongoing issue.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things at the moment. Beaver Builder still works for us as an agency, and the clients don't care. At the end of the day, the clients have no care, consideration whatsoever what tools we use. They just want the site per the scope of work within the time frame, within budget. Yep. That's all they care about.
And I'm smiling at you because at the end of the day, what we need to sell clients is the end result, not the stuff under the hood. They really don't care. No,
they don't care. If I said all of a sudden I was going to start doing work using Webflow, a lot of people are moving to Webflow from WordPress for whatever, that's fine. A lot of people go to, I've actually turned down work. We only work on WordPress. People ask us, what about Squarespace? I'm like, it's a fine tool. Wix, Weebly, I've done reviews on all of them, and they're fine for the right client. We just don't use them,
So true. So let's go back to podcasting for a minute. So we've got the final podcast. How do you promote yours usually?
I have a schedule that I also abide by. I share in 4 or 5 places weekly. I don't probably promote enough on one aspect, but that's okay, I suppose. It's when working. So I put it out on my Kitchen Sink Facebook page, Twitter, goes on my personal LinkedIn page on a Friday. So I have a Monday, a Tuesday, a Friday share. What else? I have one more day in there somewhere. I forgot where else I shared. Oh, and also, Monday, Tuesday, Friday. If I have sponsors, they get also Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a Saturday at a different time. I've been playing with some time zone shifts a little bit because of the world being what it is. So I try to help the sponsors out. But I don't over promote. And honestly, mistake I've made in a sense, I think a mistake. I don't cross the streams, if you will. It's a movie reference there.
Yep.
Where I don't share on my personal Twitter account, even though I have way more followers there. But maybe once or twice a year, I'll remind people, hey, I do this thing. And I also take sponsors. And inevitably, I get an uptick in followers, subscribers, downloads, and sponsor interest. So, but I just like to kind of keep things separate and not be a pest to people, I think is the way I word it. So,
No, I would agree with you. Not being pest is a good idea. Some people like to share their podcasts like every hour on the hour, and it's like, really? I don't need to. I think
early on, it's an approach. Now, again, like 8.5 years in, people know who I am. You're going to find me. You're going to find me. I know. I think lately I was told about 2-3 months ago, my podcast is one of the longest, if not the longest, consistently running WordPress podcasts. There are other shows out there with more episodes, but they've taken breaks. They take breaks during the holidays. They take breaks, whatever, or they'll repeat a show because, here's one from the archives. I've never done that. So,
I think yours, and the other one that comes to mind off the top of my head is one called Plugins A to Z by John Overall. I think that's the other one that's up there. But I think
he's been around a long time too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the two you're like certainly miles ahead of me. I'm only about 3.5, 4 years in. So,
Yeah. Dustin Hartzler, good friend of mine, your WordPress engineer, he got to about 500 episodes, about 10 years. And then he took a break. He started now, and his life got busy, and he now works at Automatic, or he works, but been at Automatic for a while as well. So he's just not a weekly show anymore, but he's still ahead of me based on quantity, but just not. He took a break, and again, life happens, right? So
Yeah, I get that. Do you record ahead of time or do you kind of do the day ahead? So if you're publishing Monday, do you throw it together on Sunday or do you like to
I
do
usually
it
record either Saturday or Sunday. By chance, I'm not sure when this episode comes out, but we're recording on a Friday. I do record early if I'm traveling, and I might be traveling this weekend. So I recorded today. So I'm already done for the weekend. And I will also say this. If I do interviews, I can record midweek, and I might put one in the. I have rarely had more than one or two in, done ahead of time, like way ahead, just because my content is timely in the sense of I have upcoming events, I have things that are just not evergreen, right?
Yeah. Whereas
an interview could be evergreen, but the content pre and post is usually not.
No, I agree with you. Whereas the approach I've gone over last couple of years is I like to record a couple of weeks out if it's evergreen. If it's timely, I'll sneak it in, but I try to avoid doing that. I did that recently. I did a interview with Anne McCarthy, and I put it out within 2 days because we were talking about WordPress 6.2, which is kind of timely at the time of this
She's
record.
Awesome.
Yeah, she is absolutely amazing. But I do both. It all depends on the mood I'm in, to be honest.
I mean, and also I'll record like my Q&A. So like next week's episode's already done. The week after that's Q&A, so I can record that early if I need to. I usually wait till Wednesday or Thursday, but it's not that hard. Q&As are easier because I kind of already have the questions. I can do the research, basically. The only problem I've ever had really has been when I've had a schedule to interview somebody and they've had to cancel. That's always a slight hiccup because then I have to if it's too late in the week and I don't have a backup topic, which I don't really let it happen anymore. I guess that might happen a lot more early days. Not anymore, because now I have a list of ongoing things I'm going to talk about. Or things I need to do. So, I mean, I keep a whiteboard. I usually keep about 10. On the whiteboard, I have the last 5 episodes and ideation for the next 10. So, I can move stuff around.
It's a good idea. If somebody was going to start a podcast tomorrow, and everybody thinks this is a piece of cake, and we all know that most people don't get past 5 or 10 episodes. We've seen this. What are the first 3 things you recommend?
Start with the equipment you have. Number 1, don't overthink it. Number 2, honestly, I would say before even that, based on the topic at hand that you want to talk about, write down 26 topics within the category, if you will. I guess if you're going to talk about, let's say, let's pick a topic. I don't know. I'm trying to think of
Beaver Builder.
Beaver Builder, sure. So pick 26 things you can talk about at length, 15 to 20 to 30 minutes about Beaver Builder.
Yeah.
Because that gives you a show every 2 weeks. That's a year's worth of content. Okay. So that way you have at least, if you did a show every 2 weeks, that would be a way to do it. So instead of just saying, I only have five topics and the rest will come to me, it's not the best plan. So number 1, start with that. Number 2, start with what you have as far as equipment. And number 3, be consistent. Pick a day and release on that day every week or bi-week. Just have that schedule. Plain and simple.
Yep.
Don't miss.
And the subject about sponsorships and monetization always comes up. Everybody thinks it's easy to go out and get sponsors. I would argue and say it's not easy. I haven't taken any on with this podcast. I've had people come to me. They're not the right fit. So I've said no, honestly. And how's your take on monetization? Should you, shouldn't you? How long should you wait?
So no one's gonna sponsor you for the first, I would say 50 episodes, unless you happen to be already famous or infamous in some capacity. 50 to 100, when you after 50, I think you get your legs. You kind of get comfortable in what you're doing. Your processes are down, but you need an audience. You need downloads. You need numbers to show. I didn't take any sponsorships, and I had a few interested people, but I waited to episode 100 before I even considered it. Really considered it. And then I took some, and I take them now. I have some now. I just had one this last 5 weeks. But I've turned down way more, not way more. I guess I turned way more down than people would think, because again, it needs to match my audience. My audience trusts me. I've built up a really good relationship with them. They trust my opinion. They trust my integrity and ethics. for the Kitchen Sink WP podcast, I'm not just out for a money grab. I do the podcast because I love it. I love doing it. Yep. And if it was a different podcast, sure, I might take Casper mattresses, or Harry's razors, but that does not match my audience in any stretch, right? So what's the point? Unless I'm just looking for money. So that said, I'm really make sure it makes sense. I don't take pay to play. Like I'm not going to interview somebody. I'm not going to take money as a sponsor, but and then interview the person at that company. That to me is just a little icky as well.
No, I would agree. It impacts integrity as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
When you
what
start
I will
taking...
do, right. But what I will do on this, Rob, is I will, if it makes sense, if it's a company I respect and a service or a tool I'm going to use, and they want to sponsor my show, fine. They can send me the money, and we can sponsor the show, and I can make it work. And if they want to then have somebody on the show, I will allow that to happen. But there's usually a 3 to 5 month window of when that's going to happen. They're no longer a sponsor. They move past. And the purpose of having them on the podcast is to know their story and then maybe mention their tool and service, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I've done that in the past, and I'm clear about it, but I don't let them overlap at all.
No, that's a really good practice. It sort of protects you, and it keeps the trust in your community, which is everything that's really important, right?
I mean, yeah. That said, if a company, I've had a lot of hosting companies hit me up. More often than not, most hosting companies have offered and asked of a sponsor, and I've turned a lot of them down. I won't take the same type of industry. Like I won't take 2 hosting companies at the same time. I won't take competing companies. It's just weird to me. Some people do. I just think that's weird. It's confusing to the listener as well. Yeah. But if somebody offered me, like, I guess everyone has a number. If fill in the blank, your least favorite hosting company offered you a certain number, like let's say a lot, and then times 10, would you take it? Well, maybe, but no one's offered me that kind of money yet. So
no. I have the same number, by the way. You laugh. I'm sitting here and you're talking about having a number, and mine kind of comes with 6 zeros after it before the decimal point, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah. It's got to move the needle, it's like I've had offers. People want to buy one of my domains. I own adamsilver.com. It's kind of where I do some business coaching. I've had some offers for that domain over the last 20 plus years I've had it. And to give up your namesake, if you own your domain, if you're lucky enough to own your domain, if you have it, to give up my namesake, it needs to move the needle, meaning it needs to get, me completely out of debt and put like two out of 3 of my kids through college. So,
I was there. You talk about domains. Funny story. My initials are B and C. So my middle name is Bruce. My last name is Cairns. So under domain rules, you're allowed to use your initials in a domain name if you can prove it. So for a long time, I had the domain name rbcconsulting.com. Well, RBC is a registered trademark of the Royal Bank of Canada, believe it or not, is RBC. Yeah. So they came after me and sent a lawyer after me with a takedown notice years ago. And I basically told the lawyer I can say this, my podcast, bug off. Because I said, I've got initials and I've got documented proof of my name, so go away. You can't touch me. Mm-hmm. And the end result was they offered me a fair size of money to buy that domain name, which I let them have because they made it worth their while at the time.
Right. Yeah, I have plenty of domains as well. That used to be one of my old, pieces of kryptonite. I would just have an idea, buy the domain,
Yeah.
But adamsilver.com, I have it. I've had it before the NBA commissioner here, in the NBA in the US. The commissioner is also Adam Silver. He has never offered to buy it, but other Adam Silvers have. And like the most I ever got offered was like, I think $250, which barely covers the, like at the time it was about, I guess it was 5 or 6, longer, about 10 years ago. That barely covered the 10 years of just owning the domain, the registration fees. So like, what's the point? I'm like, no. So,
So I'm going to throw something out there we can talk about. The dirty secret about podcasting, if you want it, and I've said this on the show and I've talked to other podcasters about, the beauty is when you do an interview, you get that guest to ask the questions you want. So it's almost sometimes like your own private masterclass. What do you think about that as a podcaster?
100% true. Yeah. And it's funny you mention that because I agree with it. It's true. You can reach out, having the podcast, having that audience or building the audience gives you some, give you some social proof. Like, hey, you can reach out to somebody. Hey, would you like to be on my podcast? And more often than not, people say yes, because they're not going to take your phone call and talk to you for 45 minutes just about anything. But the fact that if they can spread their gospel, whatever that is, then they're more apt to come on the podcast. Ironically enough, I had an idea recently for yet another podcast idea. I grew up in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, but in the old 1980s movies, John Hughes, stuff like that. I always look at casts. Like I was just watching Better Off Dead last night. It was on TV. Yeah. And I always wanted to know, like, well, who was the younger brother? Like, what's his name? The actor. Looked him up. I was thinking it'd be kind of a neat podcast to get those characters, those supporting actors, and see where they're at now. Just do like a 20-minute interview of those guys, of those people. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I would call it, but it might be interesting, So, but yeah, you're right. Having the ability to interview other people, if it's good, is amazing. So
yeah.
I don't think it's a secret anymore. I think that dirty little secret aspect is long since been dispelled, honestly.
Yeah, I would agree with you, actually. It's funny because, and the cool thing is, it's the connections you meet as a podcaster, right? I mean, the people you meet, the people you talk to, the people you network with, the people who become friends. A lot of mine have come out of that podcasting space, which is pretty incredible.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have another podcast technically with Kyle Maurer, but it's kind of stopped. It was called the Get Options Podcast. The reason I actually launched my own podcast was by the strong push and encouragement by Dustin Hartzler. He's like, do it, so he didn't care. We've all vacationed together. I was just in Michigan last week. I was hanging out with Kyle and his family for, 3 days. Dustin lives up in Ohio. I've been at his house. We've vacationed together. We've gone to word camps and stuff. So yeah, I mean, a lot of my friends are in that space. So it just happens, Yeah.
It's funny. You were mentioning Headway earlier, and I was thinking back to another longtime podcaster in the WordPress space, Bob Dunn, and Bob and I became friends out of the Headway community like many, many, many years ago. So yeah, he's another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've actually had him on my list. We just haven't timed it right. But I've listened to him off and on for years. And everyone knows his voice, and that's the thing. Also, eventually, people know your voice, and they know you. They think they know you in a sense, and they recognize you. And Bob's now moving out of the U.S. He's moving to Porto. Yeah, Portugal. It's pretty crazy.
Big deal for him. It's funny when we talk about podcasting. One of the things is podcasting and live streaming are starting to overlap. What do you think about that?
It's true. They are. And part of, we started, before we hit record on this, I was just thinking to myself, we talked about rearranging some of our setups, and I've rearranged my home office, and I've got some new hardware recently. I used to record old school into a Edirol mixer, and through a mixer into an Edirol recorder, from my microphone. Now I record everything directly into the computer with like a Wave XLR and a Stream Deck. I have some lights. I am toying with the idea and I've been toying with this idea for a while, of doing deeper dive content for the Kitchen Sink WP podcast, video based, because you can't show technical stuff in an audio format.
It's true.
So I thought maybe I could use Twitch, or I can record it and put it in a membership area. And I've had that idea for a long time. It just takes more work. Mm-hmm. And again, it comes down to, not that it takes more work, you just have to plan a little bit more. If you want to script it out and edit it, there's that. If you want to do it live, that's fine. That's less work. It's different. It's different. So I think there's a definite, I think it's valid to do it. I think it's no problem. It just takes time to find what works for you best. And I'll tell you, to be honest, pull back the full curtain, it's a long play. I mean, people say, do you make money with your podcast? I make some money, yes. I don't make a living at it. I don't have those kind of numbers yet. Will I ever? I don't know. WordPress is still very niche, even though it's 44% of market, of web market. Podcasting about WordPress, still very small. I don't bust. I mean, I'm at just shy of 1,000 downloads a month. I mean, about 850, 950, give or take, depends on the topic, and just depends, right? Some people, some podcasts out there in different categories, hundreds of thousands per week. That's not me. And that's okay.
No, I agree with you. I'm probably right now in about the 650 range a month. So I'm in that same area, and I don't worry about it.
I don't worry about it at all. I rarely I look at stats quarterly just to see where I'm at, and they say the average. I did notice there was a dip in early COVID because of shutdowns, and it was a weird realization. But less people were commuting, so less people were listening to podcasts.
I actually found, so I'm not only do I produce a podcast, I'm a podcast consumer. So I
right, me too.
Was looking at Pocket Cast before I got on this record with you, and I've probably got 15 podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. One is a daily, Monday to Friday. It's a sports podcast. What a shock in my world. One is a mental health podcast that's 3 days a week. All the others are weekly. And I was kind of looking at it saying, this is kind of where I sit. And I find, except for 4 or 5 of them, I interchange what I'm listening to in and out. So not all of it's work related, not all of it's business related, not all of it's WordPress related. I kind of play that in and out depending on the mood I'm in. And I'm one of these guys because, and I'm pretty well from the same era as you, I grew up in the 70s listening to AM radio. And I was a talk radio listener as a kid growing up. So when I listen to talk, to transition to listening to podcasts, basically a podcast is a talk radio show. So it was an easy transition for me kind of deal.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I remember listening to when my parents and I would go to our cabin up in the mountains. We would listen to the old radio mysteries on the drive up. So I was just counting my curve. I use you said Pocket Cast. I use Overcast, and I'm subscribed to about 30 podcasts. I used to be more. I've been less. I go back and forth. Take out the few that are my own shows, whatever. But I've also changed my listening habits lately in the last year. I don't feel guilty at all about skipping an episode of another podcast because sometimes the topic doesn't resonate. I also have changed. I used to listen to a lot of real estate investing podcasts thinking I want to do that. And I still do, but it's the same information in a different tone, a different voice, different take week to week. So I'm like, okay, I'm done with this for now. So some of it's mental health. Some of it's, I listen to a handful of running podcasts now because I run a lot. So, because I'm a runner, I suppose, not just because I run a lot. Both, if that makes sense.
And it's funny, you're right about the commute, though, because when I was out seeing clients more, I used to listen to more podcasts into a client, out of a client. Now I tend to listen to more when I'm working. And it depends what I'm doing, too, because like today I had my ear in video editing all day. Well, I can't listen to a podcast and video edit at the same time. It's not happening.
Of course not. Yeah. So I listen to most of my podcasts when I drive around or if I'm running or if I'm just kind of doing some mindless work, dishes, cleaning the house a little bit. But yeah, it's just, and living here where I live now, I found, or if I'm walking the dog is usually the number one reason why I listen to a podcast. But I will say I have a basic rule. There's this one area where I walk my dog. It's called the Greenway. It's a quarter mile long. I listen to nothing for that area because there's no traffic, there's no cars. It's really peaceful. And I make a conscious decision to have nothing in my ears for that quarter mile walk, that part of the walk.
That's amazing, actually. It's good for the mental health too, right?
Exactly. Because, we're always we're conditioned, I think you and I and people in our space, very conditioned to always be listening and doing something and learning and growing, and not be bored. But sometimes, just sometimes, being bored is better for your brain, Yeah.
Oh, it's true. It's true. And I think a lot of us in our space are ADHD, like overload. I know I am. So,
totally. 100%. 100%. So, yeah.
And it's funny because, besides podcasting, I still like to read. And I'm looking at a book right now beside me. And the book is titled The Light We Carry, which is Michelle Obama's latest book.
Oh, yeah.
And what an amazing read is all I'll say to you, Adam. And I'm still the hour before bed, I put down the podcast, I put down the TV, I put down the screen, and I grab a book and I unwind with a book every night.
Yeah.
To this day.
I'm similar. I'm reading 3 or 4 concurrently different books. Most of it's nonfiction, a lot of biographies, but a lot of it's business or mindset. I'm trying to get back into fiction. It's just hard sometimes,
I know.
Because I feel like it's not what I should be doing. But I think I probably should be doing more fiction just for the some balance. I'm currently reading. I'm really involved in. I'm trying to read Building a Second Brain.
Mm-hmm.
I think you read that, didn't you already?
I have read that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so I'm reading that because I really want. I have a pretty good system. I just feel like I have too many places I need to consolidate. So I'm reading that, and I think I'm gonna. It's basically about having a system digitally, if you will, of storing all your notes and connections and dots and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to use Obsidian. I might try Obsidian for that. We'll see how that goes.
Our mutual friend Courtney Robertson went to Obsidian and did that actually, and she's built out a whole system of. After reading that book, I'm building a second brain. So
good to know. Yeah. I mean, right now I still use Evernote because I pay $50 a year. I'm grandfathered in. People have a lot of hate for Evernote. I get it. It does what I need it to do. It's my digital file cabinet where I BCC myself on bills, emails, certain things, and I can find them easily enough. I've never had an issue of trying to get something out. I don't want to get anything out, and I'm in I think actually I pay less than $50 a year. I pay like $29.95, whatever it is. It's worth it for me to have it. So, but I kind of want something different for ideation, mind mapping, connecting dots. And that's the thing, you need to figure out what tool is right for the right job. And there's not one perfect tool. So
I agree with you. I used to be way back when I was an Evernote user, and then working in healthcare, I kind of became a OneNote user because most healthcare shops in Canada are Microsoft shops. So I switched. And I find OneNote has just gone downhill so much that I made a switch about 3 years ago to an open source note-taking package called Joplin, Joplin, as in Janis Joplin. And the coolest thing with Joplin is it supports rich text markup. Basically works the way OneNote is. You put your database where you want to put it. So if you want that database on OneDrive, you can put it on OneDrive. If you want it on Google Drive, you put it on Google Drive. It doesn't care where you put the back end. So that's really cool.
I just brought up that website. I'm going to check that out. Just curious, Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can sync it. So I have mine set up so that I sync from both my Android tablet, my iPad, my phone. So if I get caught somewhere with a device and I need to look something up, I can go ahead and do it. It's easy.
Yeah. I use a combination of like Evernote's the digital file cabinet. I use NVAlt for quick note taking. I'll use Drafts also lately. And I feel like that's too many things, like just between Drafts and NVAlt. So I'm trying to maybe consolidate down to Drafts and then send Drafts maybe to Obsidian and I also use OmniFocus for my own tasks, and then that's just all personal stuff. And then the business has its own other stuff. So, anyway.
Yeah. It never ends. Once you go
it never ends. Right.
Rabbit hole, you can be going all day.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's my next podcast. It's going to be the Rabbit Hole podcast about, task management.
Yeah, task management is just, I'm the same. Like I'm Notion for business, and then I have a task manager, and then.
Yeah,
Adam,
I hear you.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on podcasting. If somebody wants to listen to your podcast or talk about podcasting, what's the best way to listen and get a hold of you?
So you can listen to it through any of the normal channels, Apple, of course. So it's kitchensinkWP.com/iTunes. You can find it there. It's on Spotify. It's also on Google Play. And what's the other one? It's on, it got added recently to Stitcher as well.
Amazon.
iHeartRadio and Stitcher. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And if they want to get a hold of you, how's the best way?
Adam at kitchensinkwp.com.
Thanks, Adam. Have an amazing day.
Thank you. You bet.
This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Adam for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.